In a quiet suburban neighborhood where manicured lawns stretched endlessly and flower beds bloomed in perfect symmetry, life seemed almost too good to be true. The streets were lined with charming houses, each one painted in soft pastel colors, giving the impression of a picture-perfect postcard. This was Maple Crest, a community governed by strict rules set by the Homeowners Association, HOA. Every resident knew that living here came with a price. Adherence to guidelines so detailed they even dictated the color of your front door. The Thompson family had just moved into 42 Maple Lane, their new home nestled at the end of a peaceful cul-de-sac. They were excited about this fresh start, a chance to leave behind the chaos of city life and embrace the calm of suburban living. Mr. Thompson, an engineer, had taken a job nearby, while Mrs. Thompson, a former teacher turned stay-at-home mom, hoped to enjoy more quality time with her children. Their teenage son, Ethan, was eager to explore his new surroundings. With a skateboard tucked under his arm and headphones around his neck, he couldn't wait to find the best spots to practice tricks. Ethan wasn't just any teenager. He was known for his easygoing nature and friendly smile. Back in their old neighborhood, he'd been the kid everyone liked, the one who always offered a helping hand or cracked jokes to lighten the mood. But Maple Crest was different. Here, things ran like clockwork, and individuality often took a backseat to conformity. Still, Ethan didn't think much of it. To him, the empty cul-de-sac outside his house looked like the perfect place to skate without bothering anyone. What Ethan didn't know, however, was that the HOA had a reputation for being overzealous when it came to enforcing its rules. At the helm of this organization was Mr. Carlisle, a man whose love for order bordered on obsession. Tall, stern, and always dressed in pressed suits, he patrolled the streets like a general inspecting his troops. His second-in-command, Ms. Winters, was equally relentless, though her icy demeanor made her less approachable than Carlisle. Together, they ruled Maple Crest with an iron fist, ensuring every blade of grass and every parked car adhered to the HOA's meticulous standards. It wasn't long before whispers about Ethan reached their ears. A few neighbors had noticed the boy skating near his house and complained to the HOA, citing a vague rule about recreational activities deemed disruptive. While most people might have shrugged off such minor infractions, Carlisle saw an opportunity. He believed that cracking down on small violations kept the neighborhood in line. If left unchecked, something as simple as skateboarding could lead to bigger problems: loud music, unruly pets, or worse. So, one sunny afternoon, as Ethan practiced ollies and kickflips on the smooth pavement, trouble arrived. Unbeknownst to him, two figures approached from across the street. One was Carlisle, his face set in a scowl, and the other was Ms. Winters, clutching a clipboard like a weapon. Neither looked pleased. Little did they know, their actions that day would set off a chain reaction no one could have anticipated. Across the street, unnoticed by all, a young girl named Lily watched curiously from her driveway. She didn't realize it yet, but she was about to become part of something much bigger than a simple neighborhood dispute. As Ethan skated effortlessly on the smooth pavement, lost in the rhythm of his movements, he barely noticed the two figures approaching until they were right in front of him. Mr. Carlisle and Ms. Winters stood side by side, their expressions stern and unyielding. Carlisle's sharp suit seemed out of place under the bright afternoon sun, while Ms. Winters clutched her clipboard tightly, as if it were a shield against chaos itself. "Excuse me, young man," Carlisle began, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the neighborhood. Ethan stopped mid-trick, startled but polite. He pulled out one earbud and looked up at them with wide eyes. "Yes, sir," he replied, sensing something was off, but unsure what to expect. Carlisle wasted no time getting to the point. "We've received multiple complaints about your activities here," he said, gesturing vaguely toward Ethan's skateboard. "Skateboarding is strictly prohibited in this area according to HOA regulations. It's disruptive and poses a safety risk." Ethan blinked, taken aback. "Disruptive? Sir, I'm just practicing tricks. No one's around, and I'm not hurting anything." His tone was calm, respectful even, but there was a hint of confusion in his voice. He didn't understand how simply skating could cause so much trouble. Ms. Winters stepped forward, her lips pressed into a thin line. "That's irrelevant," she snapped, tapping her pen against the clipboard for emphasis. "You're violating a clearly stated rule. If you don't stop immediately, we'll have no choice but to take further action." "Further action," Ethan echoed, his brow furrowing. The phrase sounded ominous, though he couldn't imagine what they meant. Before he could ask, Carlyle leaned in slightly, his towering frame casting a shadow over the teenager. "Let's just say," he said slowly, enunciating each word, "we can make things very difficult for your family if this behavior continues." The threat hung heavy in the air, though neither Carlyle nor Winters explicitly spelled out what those difficulties might entail. They didn't need to. Their tone and body language spoke volumes. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine despite the warmth of the day. For a moment, he considered arguing, or at least asking for clarification, but something about their demeanor made him hesitate. Instead, he nodded quietly, grabbed his skateboard, and walked back toward his house without another word. Across the street, Lily Holloway watched the entire exchange unfold. She had been sitting on the steps of her porch, flipping through a magazine, when she noticed the confrontation. At first, she thought nothing of it. Neighborhood squabbles weren't uncommon in Maple Crest. But as the conversation grew more intense, her curiosity turned to concern. She recognized the look on Ethan's face, confusion mixed with unease. Something about the way Carlyle and Winters loomed over him felt wrong. Lily glanced down at her phone, which was propped up on the railing beside her. Earlier that afternoon, her older brother Noah had asked her to record some footage of the neighborhood for a school project. The camera was still running, capturing everything in crisp detail. As the HOA members finally turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing alone, Lily realized she might have caught something important on tape. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Lily replayed the video on her phone. Her heart sank as she listened to Carlyle's thinly veiled threats and saw the way Ethan visibly recoiled. This wasn't just a minor disagreement. It was bullying, plain and simple. And it happened right in front of her house. When her brother Noah came home later that night, Lily showed him the footage. Noah, a law student interning under their father, the district attorney, immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. "This isn't okay," he muttered, his jaw tightening as he watched. "What they did, it might actually be illegal." Lily frowned, tilting her head. "Illegal? How?" Noah paused the video and looked at his sister, threatening someone, especially a minor, to enforce rules. That could qualify as harassment or even coercion. Depending on how far they're willing to go, this could get serious. He shook his head, his mind already racing with possibilities. Dad needs to see this. Though neither sibling realized it yet, the events of that afternoon would ripple far beyond Maple Crest. What started as a routine HOA warning was about to spiral into something much bigger. A story that would challenge the boundaries of power, justice, and community. The next morning, Mrs. Thompson decided it was time to introduce herself to their new neighbors. She had noticed the young girl watching Ethan's encounter with the HOA members and thought it might be a good idea to reach out. After all, building friendships in the neighborhood could only help them settle in faster. Little did she know, this simple gesture would lead to an unexpected twist in their story. Mrs. Thompson knocked on the door of the house across the street, where Lily lived with her family. A few moments later, the door opened, revealing a tall man with sharp features and an air of authority. This was District Attorney Richard Holloway, though Mrs. Thompson didn't yet know his title or reputation. He greeted her warmly, inviting her inside to meet the rest of the family. As they sat down in the cozy living room, Lily joined them, curious about the visitor. Mrs. Thompson explained that she and her husband had recently moved into the neighborhood and wanted to get to know their neighbors better. The conversation flowed easily until Mrs. Thompson mentioned Ethan's run-in with the HOA the previous day. "Oh, I saw that," Lily chimed in, her voice tinged with concern. "Those people were really mean to your son. They scared him pretty bad." Mrs. Thompson's expression shifted from polite curiosity to worry. "Mean? What do you mean, exactly?" she asked, leaning forward slightly. Lily hesitated for a moment before glancing at her brother Noah, who had just walked into the room. Sensing the gravity of the situation, Noah stepped in. "Mom, Dad, can I show you something?" he said, pulling out his phone. Without waiting for a response, he played the video he had recorded the day before. The footage left everyone speechless. There was no mistaking the aggressive tone Carlisle and Winters used when speaking to Ethan. Their body language screamed intimidation, and their thinly veiled threats were impossible to ignore. Even Mr. Holloway, a seasoned prosecutor accustomed to difficult cases, looked troubled as he watched. When the video ended, there was a long pause. Finally, Mrs. Thompson broke the silence. "I had no idea it was that bad," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Ethan didn't say anything about this. He must have been too embarrassed, or maybe he didn't want to upset us." Mr. Holloway leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "This isn't just a neighborhood dispute," he said gravely. "What these individuals did could potentially qualify as felony harassment, or worse, threatening someone, especially a minor. To enforce arbitrary rules is not acceptable under any circumstances." Noah nodded in agreement. "And Dad, remember what we talked about last night. This isn't the first time the HOA has been accused of overstepping. If we dig deeper, we might find a pattern here." Mrs. Thompson looked overwhelmed but determined. "But why would they go so far? It's just skateboarding. Surely they don't think this kind of behavior is justified." Mr. Holloway sighed. "Unfortunately, power can corrupt even the smallest authorities. People like Carlisle thrive on control, and when challenged, they often resort to extreme measures to maintain it. But they made a mistake this time. They picked the wrong family to target." At this, Noel smiled faintly. "Dad's right. You should consider filing a formal complaint. With this evidence, we can hold them accountable. And if necessary, I'll help gather more information to support your case." Mrs. Thompson hesitated, torn between standing up for her son and avoiding conflict in their new community. She glanced at Lily, who gave her an encouraging nod. "It's okay, Mrs. Thompson," Lily said softly. "You shouldn't let them treat Ethan, or anyone, like that." After a few moments of reflection, Mrs. Thompson straightened her posture and nodded resolutely. "All right," she said. "If this is what it takes to protect my son, and others like him, then we'll do it. Thank you, all of you, for helping us see what's really going on." As the Thompsons prepared to take action, the Holloways knew they were stepping into uncharted territory. For Noah, this was more than just a legal matter. It was a chance to fight for justice and expose wrongdoing. And for Lily, it was proof that standing up for what's right, even in small ways, could make a big difference. Unbeknownst to everyone, the wheels of change were already turning. What started as a routine day in Maple Crest was about to become a pivotal moment, setting the stage for a showdown that would shake the entire neighborhood to its core. The Thompsons' decision to file a formal complaint against the HOA sent shockwaves through Maple Crest. Word spread quickly, as it always did in tight-knit neighborhoods like this one. By the end of the week, everyone seemed to have an opinion about what had happened, or at least their version of it. Some residents sympathized with Ethan, recalling times when Carlisle or Winters had intimidated them over minor infractions. Others sided firmly with the HOA, believing that rules were rules and exceptions only led to chaos. Meanwhile, investigators began digging deeper into the HOA's practices, uncovering a troubling pattern. It turned out that Carlisle and Winters weren't just strict. They were notorious for bending, or outright breaking, the rules to maintain control. A few former neighbors came forward with stories of being threatened with fines or legal action if they didn't comply with unreasonable demands. One elderly woman recounted how she was pressured into repainting her mailbox after Carlisle deemed its color too bold. Another family described receiving anonymous letters accusing them of violating noise ordinances, even though they rarely hosted gatherings. Noah Holloway took charge of gathering evidence, determined to build a strong case. He spent hours reviewing old HOA meeting minutes, financial records, and archived emails. What he found was alarming. There were discrepancies in how funds were allocated, favoritism in rule enforcement, and a consistent lack of transparency. Most damning of all were the written warnings sent to residents, many of which contained language eerily similar to what Ethan had faced, vague threats designed to instill fear rather than resolve issues. As the investigation gained momentum, local news outlets caught wind of the story. Reporters descended on Maple Crest, eager to cover what was quickly becoming known as the skateboard scandal. Cameras rolled as journalists interviewed residents, some of whom praised the HOA for keeping the neighborhood pristine, while others condemned its leadership for fostering a culture of fear. The media attention brought the issue into sharp focus, forcing even the most apathetic neighbors to take sides. Carlisle and Winters tried desperately to defend themselves, but their attempts only made matters worse. In a hastily organized press conference, Carlisle insisted that the HOA's actions were justified and necessary to preserve property values. "We're not villains," he declared, his voice tinged with frustration. "We're protecting our community from disorder and decay." But his words rang hollow when juxtaposed with the mounting evidence of misconduct. Winters fared no better. During an interview with a local reporter, she dismissed accusations of harassment as exaggerations, claiming that people misunderstood their intentions. "All we've ever wanted is to keep Maple Crest beautiful and harmonious," she said stiffly. Yet her defensive tone and refusal to answer specific questions only fueled suspicions about her motives. Behind closed doors, tensions within the HOA board itself began to rise. Several members distanced themselves from Carlisle and Winters, fearing association with their increasingly toxic reputations. One member resigned outright, citing ethical concerns. Even longtime supporters started questioning whether the organization's methods had gone too far. For the Thompsons, the growing scrutiny was both validating and overwhelming. They hadn't anticipated becoming the center of such a public storm, but they refused to back down. With Noah's guidance, they cooperated fully with investigators, providing statements and sharing additional details about their experience. Mrs. Thompson also reached out to other affected families, encouraging them to speak up. Slowly but surely, a coalition of concerned residents formed, united by a shared desire for accountability. As the scandal unfolded, Maple Crest transformed from a sleepy suburb into a battleground for justice. Neighbors who once avoided conflict now found themselves discussing systemic problems over coffee or during evening walks. For the first time in years, people dared to question the unchecked authority of the HOA and imagine a future where fairness outweighed fear. Little did anyone know, the real drama was yet to come. The evidence was piling up, public sentiment was shifting, and the stage was set for a reckoning that would change Maple Crest forever. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the trial against Mr. Carlisle and Ms. Winters began. What had started as a simple neighborhood dispute had escalated into a high-profile legal battle, drawing attention not just from Maple Crest, but from surrounding communities as well. Reporters lined the benches, their notebooks at the ready, while curious residents packed the gallery, eager to witness history unfold. Prosecutors presented their case with precision, laying out a timeline of events supported by irrefutable evidence. Noah's video footage took center stage, playing on a large screen for everyone to see. The jury watched intently as Carlisle and Winters loomed over Ethan, their voices sharp and menacing. Even those who hadn't been convinced before found it hard to deny the intimidation captured in vivid detail. But the prosecution didn't stop there. They called several former HOA members and neighbors to testify about the organization's pattern of misconduct. One woman recounted how she was fined excessively for planting flowers that didn't match the HOA-approved palette, despite receiving no prior warning. Another man described being threatened with foreclosure after disputing an inflated assessment fee, a fee later revealed to have been fabricated. Each story painted a clearer picture of an organization more interested in control than community. Carlisle and Winters sat stoically at the defense table, their faces pale but resolute. Their attorney argued that their actions were misunderstood, framing them as dedicated individuals who simply cared deeply about maintaining standards. They weren't trying to harm anyone, the lawyer insisted. They were protecting the neighborhood from disorder. Yet cracks began to show in the defense's narrative. Under cross-examination, Carlisle stumbled when asked why certain rules were enforced inconsistently. When pressed about the anonymous letters sent to residents, Winters grew visibly flustered, claiming she couldn't recall authorizing such tactics. The jury exchanged skeptical glances, clearly unimpressed by their evasiveness. Outside the courthouse, tensions simmered among Maple Crest residents. Supporters of the HOA held signs praising Carlisle and Winters as guardians of our community, while opponents chanted slogans like "justice over fear." Arguments occasionally broke out between the two groups, forcing police officers to step in and maintain order. Despite the chaos, one thing was undeniable. The trial had ignited a conversation about accountability and fairness that couldn't be ignored. Back inside, District Attorney Holloway delivered a powerful closing statement. Standing tall behind the podium, he addressed the jury with unwavering conviction. "This isn't just about skateboarding or property values," he said, his voice steady but impassioned. "It's about whether we allow fear and intimidation to dictate how we live." These defendants crossed a line. They used threats and coercion to enforce arbitrary rules, targeting innocent families and silencing dissent. Today, you have the power to send a message. No one is above the law. As Holloway returned to his seat, the room fell silent. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, resonating with everyone present. Even Carlisle and Winters seemed to shrink slightly under the scrutiny, their earlier confidence replaced by unease. After hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. As the forepersons stood to announce the decision, the courtroom held its collective breath. "Guilty," came the solemn declaration, echoing through the space. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief and relief. Carlisle and Winters exchanged panicked looks, realizing the gravity of what had just happened. The judge sentenced them to hefty fines and probation, emphasizing that their behavior undermined trust within the community. More importantly, the ruling set a precedent. Homeowner associations could no longer operate without oversight or consequence. For many residents, it felt like a long overdue victory, a chance to rebuild Maple Crest on a foundation of fairness rather than fear. As the Thompsons left the courthouse that day, they were met with applause and heartfelt thanks from neighbors who had once hesitated to speak out. Ethan, clutching his skateboard, smiled shyly, knowing he'd played a part in sparking real change. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a new chapter for Maple Crest, one where courage triumphed over control. The guilty verdict sent shockwaves through Maple Crest, leaving the neighborhood in a state of reflection and transformation. For years, residents had lived under the shadow of Carlisle and Winters' ironclad rule, too afraid or apathetic to challenge their authority. But now, with justice served, the community began to imagine a future free from fear, a future where they could reclaim their neighborhood. In the weeks following the trial, the HOA underwent sweeping changes. Under mounting pressure from both residents and local officials, Carlisle and Winters were permanently removed from their positions. A special election was held to replace them, and for the first time in years, candidates campaigned on platforms of transparency, inclusivity, and collaboration. The new board members, parents, retirees, and young professionals, were determined to heal the rifts caused by their predecessors. One of the first orders of business was revising the HOA's infamous rulebook. Gone were the draconian regulations about flower colors, mailbox styles, and recreational activities. Instead, the updated guidelines focused on practical matters like safety, noise control, and shared spaces. Skateboarding, once banned outright, was now allowed in designated areas after Ethan himself suggested creating a small skate park near the cul-de-sac. To everyone's surprise, even former critics warmed up to the idea, recognizing it as a way to foster community spirit. For the Thompsons, life in Maple Crest took on a new rhythm. Ethan became something of a local hero, not because he sought attention, but because his courage inspired others to stand up for themselves. He continued practicing his tricks at the newly built skate park, often joined by other kids who finally felt welcome to express themselves without fear of retribution. Mrs. Thompson, meanwhile, found herself increasingly involved in neighborhood events, organizing potlucks and block parties that brought people together in ways they hadn't experienced before. Noah Holloway earned widespread admiration for his role in exposing the wrongdoing. His internship with his father turned into an opportunity to advocate for systemic reforms beyond Maple Crest. He began giving talks at community centers and schools, encouraging young people to recognize injustice and take action. "You don't need a title or position to make a difference," he often said during these speeches. "Sometimes all it takes is standing up for what's right, even if it feels scary." Lily, too, played her part in reshaping the neighborhood dynamic. Her quiet observation skills made her a trusted mediator among peers, helping resolve conflicts before they escalated. She also started a blog documenting life in Maple Crest, focusing on stories of resilience and unity. Her posts quickly gained popularity, offering readers a hopeful perspective on how communities can grow stronger through adversity. As spring arrived, Maple Crest blossomed, not just in its gardens, but in its sense of renewal. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now greeted each other warmly. Families gathered for weekend cleanup drives, turning chores into bonding experiences. Even those who had staunchly defended Carlisle and Winters came around, acknowledging that change was necessary for progress. At the heart of this transformation was a renewed understanding of what it meant to belong. Maple Crest wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was learning to embrace imperfections as opportunities for growth. Residents realized that rules weren't meant to stifle creativity or enforce conformity. They were tools to ensure harmony while allowing individuality to thrive. For Ethan, skating down the cul-de-sac one sunny afternoon, the difference was palpable. Kids laughed nearby, parents chatted over lemonade, and the air carried a lightness it hadn't before. It was proof that standing up for oneself, and for others, could ripple outward, touching lives in ways no one expected. Maple Crest still had work to do, but it was heading in the right direction. And as Ethan flipped his skateboard into the air with a grin, he knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, a single act of bravery could spark a movement that changed everything. For the better. Months after the trial, Maple Crest had transformed into a place almost unrecognizable from the rigid, fear-driven neighborhood it once was. The scars of the past still lingered faintly. Whispers of the skateboard scandal occasionally surfaced during community meetings, but they served more as reminders of resilience than sources of division. Life in the suburb had taken on a new rhythm, one defined by cooperation, kindness, and a shared commitment to making things better. Ethan Thompson became a symbol of change, not because he sought fame, but because his actions inspired others to believe in their own power to make a difference. His daily trips to the skate park were no longer solitary ventures. Instead, he was often joined by a group of kids who looked up to him as both a role model and a friend. The small skate park, tucked neatly at the edge of the cul-de-sac, had become a hub of activity, a testament to how something simple could bring people together. Parents gathered on benches nearby, chatting while keeping an eye on their children, creating bonds that extended beyond casual pleasantries. Mrs. Thompson found herself stepping into a leadership role within the community, organizing events that celebrated diversity and creativity. Her annual Maple Crest Talent Show drew participants of all ages, showcasing everything from poetry readings to guitar solos. Even Mr. Carlyle's teenage grandson performed a comedic skit about overzealous HOA rules, earning laughter and applause from the crowd. It was moments like these that proved forgiveness and humor could heal old wounds. Noah Holloway's journey also reached new heights. The trial solidified his passion for justice, and he graduated law school with honors, determined to pursue a career advocating for underrepresented communities. His speeches and workshops gained traction far beyond Maple Crest, inspiring young people across the county to speak out against injustice. Yet despite his growing responsibilities, Noah always made time to visit home, where he continued mentoring teens like Ethan and Lily. To him, Maple Crest wasn't just a starting point. It was proof that grassroots efforts could spark meaningful change. Lily, now older and more confident, channeled her love for storytelling into a budding journalism career. Her blog about Maple Crest evolved into a local newsletter, covering everything from school fundraisers to environmental initiatives. Through her writing, she highlighted the unsung heroes of the community, the volunteers, teachers, and everyday residents working quietly to improve lives. Her words painted a picture of hope, reminding readers that even small acts of kindness could leave lasting impacts. As for the HOA, the new board worked tirelessly to rebuild trust. Monthly meetings were open forums where residents voiced concerns without fear of retaliation. A suggestion box outside the clubhouse encouraged anonymous feedback, ensuring everyone felt heard. Slowly but surely, the organization shed its reputation as a source of dread and emerged as a platform for collaboration. Residents began taking pride in their shared spaces, planting trees and painting murals that reflected the vibrancy of their revitalized spirit. One crisp autumn evening, the neighborhood came together for its first-ever Unity Festival. Strings of fairy lights adorned porches, and tables lined the streets, laden with homemade dishes. Kids darted between houses playing tag, while adults swapped stories around fire pits. At the center of it all stood Ethan, skating effortlessly under the glow of lanterns, drawing cheers from the crowd. For many, this festival marked the culmination of months of hard work, a celebration of unity forged through adversity. That night, as fireworks lit up the sky, Maple Crest felt alive in a way it never had before. The shadow of the past had lifted, replaced by a sense of purpose and connection. Families realized that their strength lay not in rigid rules, but in their ability to adapt, forgive, and grow together. For Ethan, lying on the grass beside Lily and watching the colorful bursts above, the moment felt surreal. He thought back to the day Carlyle and Winters confronted him, how scared and alone he'd felt then. Now, surrounded by friends and neighbors who cared deeply about each other, he understood the true meaning of community. Maple Crest wasn't perfect. It still faced challenges, but it was learning to embrace them with courage and compassion. And as long as people like Ethan, Noah, and Lily remained committed to standing up for what was right, the future looked brighter than ever.